You're on.
Yay! So,
Go.
so I've been told to put the microphone up to my chin, and that's the best way to do it. So if you can't hear me, just let me know. My name is Bob Watrus and
Deena Heg.
And we have been doing the evaluation of Guided Pathways for College Spark over the last few years. And before that, we actually did it for Achieving the Dream. So we've had a chance to follow the colleges that have started implementing, now implementing, but have planned and developed their Guided Pathways efforts. And we wanted today to share some of the lessons that have been learned through those early efforts at planning, developing, and implementing Guided Pathways to kind of help inform the efforts as you all start your journey on Guided Pathways. And so we're going to highlight some points and try to do it very quickly. I should mention that you also have on your table a summary of what we're going to be talking about today. It's a 7-page brief. It's also available on the State Board website, and it is titled Lessons Learned. One of the points we wanted to make at the outset is that Guided Pathways fundamentally represents institutional, transformational, systemic change. And as a result, Guided Pathways is not only about the what of change, the individual essential practices that cover things like program maps, advising, intake, all that stuff. It's also about the how you go about approaching the work. And so it's really important to keep in mind not only the what, which is really critical, but also the how, which is also critical. The other piece that's also critically important is advancing equity. And so as you all go about approaching this work, it's really important to keep in mind all those things: institutional change, equity, and the essential practices, and address those as you go about approaching this work. For example, as you work through, just to pick an example, program maps, it's important to keep in mind the institutional change and equity dimensions of the work. It all goes together. And so we're going to highlight some of the lessons that have been learned about institutional change, equity, and the essential practices.
So because this is a whole institution transformation effort, there are a couple of things that are different and critical. One is top leadership really has to be visible and engaged and active all the way through. And this is a little different than initiatives people have worked on in the past, where you can announce something and then kind of step out and let people go. Leaders will do this differently, and we're well aware there's a tightrope leaders walk where you want to not do too much and you want to make sure you do enough, and everybody will find their own ways of doing this. But top leadership is going to need to be involved actively throughout this whole event for it to really be transformational change. And another thing that we learned is that because this is a whole institution change, you got to use the whole organizational structure all the way through, from the top to the bottom and all the way from side to side. And that means VPs, presidents, deans, all the people in official leadership positions, but also your informal leaders, and everybody knows you have them and you know who they are. Get them engaged and keep them engaged. So from top to bottom, across functions and disciplines, that's the only way to make this be a whole institutional change. And then the last thing I would say about leadership is, given everybody knows people move in and out of leadership positions in the system, can't be helped. It's one of the things that just happens. And given how much movement there is, think about having transition plans for leadership changes so that you don't lose valuable time and momentum when people move in and out. The other thing that that is critical for Guided Pathways is broad and deep faculty and staff engagement. And so, because it is an all-institutional change, I have to do all these hand gestures, so I'm going to just speak louder. So broad meaning reach to all corners of the institution, not just a small committee, but get this work out everywhere. And deep meaning engage people in the work itself so that they bring their strengths to the table to help make change happen. And the reason we say, liven that slide, Bob, to make sure the slide's on. The reason we say time, support, and resources here is because this can't be an add-on at the end of the day or a small volunteer work group. So to bring everybody into the work in different levels, you're going to have to find some ways to carve out time and resources and support, release time, stipends. And believe me, we know things are thin, but you may have to think about how you can carve some of that time out to make sure people can be engaged across the campus and be engaged deeply in the work. And in that same vein, you're going to want to intentionally and deliberately structure your work so that you have work groups and committees that cross functions and cross departments and disciplines. And it isn't just because collaboration is good, although collaboration is good. It's because other people are going to have info that you need. For example, you're going to have a team designing maybe a student success class. It's good to have both faculty and student services people on that team because there are things in that class that each group has something to say about and might want to include. You might want to have your STEM people be able to talk with English and math people about contextualizing English and math for a pathway, or your social sciences people be able to talk to math and English faculty to make sure that your math pathways are the ones that make sense for the program. So you're going to need to mix people in groups. And even though there will be times when job-alike groups will split off to do specific tasks, just make sure you don't lose sight of bringing them back together so that you can make sure that collaboration and kind of cross-fertilization of knowledge happens. And I also want to say a word for trying to think creatively about getting adjunct faculty involved in this work and workforce program faculty. These are major challenges, and we know they're major challenges, but what we have seen is that at colleges where they are left out of the work, they're out of the work. They don't see themselves as part of Guided Pathways, and Guided Pathways becomes a small little program that belongs to one group. So I know that is hard to do. So start thinking about ways you can bring them into this. And the other thing we would say we've learned is not only start Guided Pathways with case-making activities. The empathy activity this morning is a good example, by the way, of a case-making activity. Don't just start with them, but go on with them. It's not like if you do it on opening day, then you're done. Because people move in and out of the college, but also even the people who are at the college need to kind of have the meaning of their work refreshed. And it's funny how that can kind of re-enliven work for people. So one way to do this case-making stuff is to get people hands-on engaged. So at a department meeting, looking at your disaggregated course and program data, and not in the, we're not doing this right way, but more in the, what are the opportunities we have here to make this work better? What could we do in instruction that would achieve some equity goals? What do we bring to the table? What are the strengths we bring that could make things work? And then the last thing I would say about engagement is, no, institutional change is iterative. It's continuous. Build in ways and times to reflect, step back from what you're doing, reflect on your work a little bit, think about how it's going, what you might want to tweak. Give yourself some breathing space and thinking time. Bob?
So I wanted to say a few words about equity. Washington. To the chin, to the chin. So Washington really has been at the forefront of building in equity as part of its Guided Pathways efforts. And the early adopter colleges have really wrestled with different approaches to really infusing the work with equity. And so we wanted to just highlight some of the approaches. And this is not like a 1, 2, 3, 4, like you start with the definitions and then you move into the other pieces. These are the range of approaches that colleges have taken to infusing equity in their work. So the first one is, as I sort of alluded to, developing an equity definition or a framework. One college, Everett, really expended a lot of energy in coming up with 5 dimensions of equity to drive its work. And it's available on their website. But that's a college that really took a lot of time up front to work on that and for that to drive their work. Others have taken different approaches to coming up with a definition of equity. And again, not all have used that as the starting point, but for some, that was a starting point. Deena mentioned this in what she was talking about in terms of engagement, using quantitative and qualitative data. So getting folks to look at disaggregated data, student outcome data at different levels, institutional, program, course level, and getting folks, using that as a way of engaging folks in this work in a meaningful way for the institution. Building leadership, staff capacity. Most colleges now have equity, diversity, and inclusion staff, and the early adopter colleges have engaged those staff in the Guided Pathways work. This is sort of repetitive, but engaging faculty and staff in the equity work, and so that's involved such things as training, the analysis of data, and the like, but engaging them in the work. And then developing practices that have an equity mindset. And so this kind of goes to the point about, as you're approaching the essential practices of Guided Pathways, infusing equity into that work. A couple of examples. Building in the aspirational dimension of equity into your advising policies and practices or your advising model so that the equity is built into your advising approach. Another example is developing professional development with an equity mindset. So that can include such things as inclusive pedagogy, active teaching and learning, those approaches that have been shown to have an effect on equity gaps.
Reminding you, this is online, and it is a brief. It's 7 pages, so you can actually read it. We actually asked a president years ago if we wanted to give you info, what form would it take? And she looked at us and said, page of bullet points. And we can't quite do page of bullet points, but this is 7 pages, so you can take a look at it. But we want to highlight a couple of things that are really hard-won lessons learned by the early adopter schools. One of them is exploration. So when you read in your work plan about exploratory sequence for undecided students, that's an essential practice. And that's been an interesting challenge for colleges. And the responses to it have ranged quite a bit, from using online career exploration tools in onboarding or even before official onboarding, to entry advising where exploration about pathway choice is talked about, to exploration in first quarter college success classes, to first quarters that have exploratory pathway courses or program content courses. So the best overall lesson we've learned from the early adopter schools has really been build-in exploration at multiple points from before students enter onwards, so that they can do some real thinking about where they want to be, what kind of pathway they want to be in.
And in multiple ways. So there's use of technology tools. So a number of colleges have these at the front end, technology tools so that you can do some early career exploration, building it into the classroom in like college success courses, building it into advising. So early and often and in different venues and different tools.
A couple of tips on program mapping. Once again, this is a thing that you're going to want to set aside some time and space and resources for faculty and staff to do this work for all the reasons we mentioned above, and it takes some real time and discussion to do it well. So if you start your program mapping work with the program learning outcomes that you want students to leave with, that helps inform how you design your maps, what the default course sequences are. What we've seen early adopter colleges also do is develop or research or borrow tools and supports like mapping templates from other colleges across the country that have already done this. Some of them have trained their folks on how to map and and have given them examples of what good maps look like. Consider coming up with some guiding principles for all people working on maps to use as they work on maps like English and math. When do you want that in the first year? When do you want a first content course that will engage students and keep them with you? Some colleges have used program and course level data to help them with mapping to understand what course sequences work. And also one of the major lessons that the early adopter colleges have learned is even mapping is an iterative process. You know, you do your first version and you think it's great, and then you look at it again and you say, oh, look at this. We were too specific. We were not specific enough. We forgot to put this stuff in. Don't mind that. This is a big, challenging piece of work. And know that, and it's okay that it is. And the last thing I would say about program mapping is make sure you don't design program maps and then put them in a drawer. So when you're designing program maps, make a plan for how you're going to use them, because they're going to need to be tied to ed plans, and you're going to have to think about in what is the best way in which you can make sure they're used and they're used throughout your system.
So the next essential practice, see, now I'm getting it, it's up to my chin. So the next essential practice that we wanted to say a few words about was intake and advising. And so in looking across the early adopter colleges, there's sort of an emerging intake and advising model or models that have developed. And so some features of that, as the slide says, online tools and resources, including career exploration, entry advising, and typically what colleges are doing is aligning their entry advisors, ed planners, navigators, success, a variety of terms are used, but aligning them with their meta majors or pathways so that they develop some expertise and content knowledge and connection with the faculty in those areas. College success course is part of the intake and advising process. The faculty mentors, that's typically the role that's emerging for faculty, is to provide mentoring around career, program, transfer, having that content knowledge. Support teams, so it's a team approach to advising, so that you've got your entry advisors, ed planners, you've got faculty, you've got other student services staff like financial aid, others as well, so it's a team sport. And then the other piece is technology supports. And so that means such things as scheduling, using technology for scheduling, appointments, communication among support team members and the like. So that's sort of the emerging models around advising for the early cohort, early adopter colleges. A couple of issues and challenges that we've seen with the colleges. One is defining faculty's role in advising. Typically faculty, for most colleges, not all, but faculty have played a role in advising, but as a result of Guided Pathways, there's the need to define further faculty's role in advising. And so that's something that has caused some hiccups or has taken some time to work through at the early adopter colleges. Sometimes it's a matter of conversations, contract negotiations, and the like. But faculty's role in advising is one issue or challenge. Another quick one is, I mentioned the support teams and moving to a team approach. Typically there's been a handoff from advising to faculty. And with the change to more of a team approach, that requires training and sort of a cultural shift. And so that's something that takes some time. to deal with. Another issue is that of entry, advising after entry. Most of the early adopter colleges now have in mind their advising model at least through entry or 45 credits, but beyond, there's still work to be done. So it's definitely a work in progress. One thing that the colleges have done at the outset, or some colleges have done at the outset, is to map the student experience, current and ideal, and that's one way of starting to get your hands, head, everything else around this work, and not looking at it as, oh, this is intake, oh, this is advising, oh, this is that. It's all separate. It's mapping that whole student experience. And I guess the last one's mine too, and that is math and English, degree math and college English within the first year. Prior to the start of Guided Pathways, I would say all of the early adopter colleges had undertaken a whole range of math reforms, but were still below the Guided Pathways expectation that a majority of students earn college math within the first year. And so one of the things that we've learned through this work, as well as the Achieving the Dream work, is that it's important to make reforms at scale and to do this with the end in mind. And in this case, it's earning college math within the first year and a majority of students achieving that outcome. The other thing to point out is that most of the early adopter colleges are now looking at co-requisite math as a way to meet this Guided Pathways expectation.
And I think Heather and Diane have some lessons of their own that they want to add.
Yeah, so Bob and Deena asked me to share a few thoughts of what we've learned at College Spark from the early adopters in this work. So I would say that one of the, can somebody else click for me? One of the things we've learned is that this work is equal parts difficult and important. I think difficult in that the early adopter colleges would tell you that for every success they've had, they've been preceded by efforts that didn't work, and that pull to return to the status quo, even after you've done all this work, is really, really strong. But also really equal parts important in that this really does feel like this pivotal moment. I feel like there's this synergy around Guided Pathways that really is unlike anything I've ever seen before. So a lot of those early adopter colleges are really taking advantage of this moment in time to think big and go really bold in a moment in time when those kinds of ideas can actually be put into motion. So my observation has been that the early adopter colleges that have been the most effective at this effort have some common characteristics. They have leaders who have a relentless commitment to student success, and those leaders are utilizing the Guided Pathways framework as a way to move towards that goal. And that commitment is understood throughout their colleges. Those leaders are willing to make really tough decisions that are really popular with some people and really unpopular with other people. And while not everybody agrees with those decisions, everybody understands that the decision was made because the leader felt like it was the best thing for student success, not because of politics or because they appreciated somebody's pet project more than somebody else's. Most effective colleges also really, like Bob and Deena said, understand that engagement isn't something to pay attention to at the beginning and then be done with. It's something you have to tend to throughout, and that they've also really empower the college's change makers no matter where they live on the college's hierarchy. One other thing that I really think sets apart some of the colleges that are having more success with this than others is that they are really resisting some of the false dichotomies that come up in this work all the time. They're spending as much time tending to the what as the how and seeing those both as equally important. They're keeping track of each of the essential practices and making sure that work is happening, but they're also really making sure those are all connected together with each other. And then this is a really big one that I want to talk about for just a moment, which is the difference between technical and adaptive. Are those terms that everybody's familiar with, technical problems and solutions and adaptive? I feel like in Guided Pathways, so much of Guided Pathways just defies those two categories. Almost everything in Guided Pathways has technical and adaptive intertwined into one big ball. And I want to give an analogy from my own life about how I think that plays out here. So how many of you have been to a gay pride event in the past, say, 5 years? Raise your hands high and proud. Thank you. Now, how many of you went to a gay pride event 20 years ago? Anybody went to one then? So you might know that those look like two really different events, don't they? You know, these days you go to a gay pride event, the mayor's there, there's legislators there, the scouts are there, Boeing's there, T-Mobile. It's this incredibly pedestrian, family-friendly event. There's still some people letting their flag fly for sure. But compared to 20 years ago, when it was, we're here, we're queer, we're proud of it, get used to it, those are really different events, and that is by design. I can't tell you how many meetings I sat through with marriage equality advocates debating how gay pride could be used as an avenue to gain more acceptance in society for our families. There was a big adaptive work we were trying to do, and I think that the difference between gay pride then and now shows the progress on that adaptive work. Meanwhile, we were having babies. We wanted our partners to adopt them. Those babies needed health care. We had marriages that needed to be recognized by the state to get rights and privileges that we really needed. We needed states and employers to step up with technical solutions to address those problems. So there was this technical body of work happening. At the same time, there was this adaptive body of work, and they were both really, really important. In this work here, I feel like the adaptive work is really about Guided Pathways being this opportunity to become equity-minded and to examine practices and policies that are steeped in the biases of the dominant culture in this country in order to create institutions that work better for everyone. And at the same time, Guided Pathways offers lots of technical strategies that can help students reach their goals. MAPs are a technical exercise. Having a class schedule where you can actually get all the classes you need within a couple of years, that's a technical exercise. Co-rec is it's applying something that works. But all of those technical solutions can help students get further along. And they all have adaptive components. Having a map, creating a map, that might be technical. Getting that map to drive scheduling, getting that map to be used in advising, that's adaptive. So I would just really encourage us to stop thinking of those as these separate things where maybe one's more valuable than the other, but they are intertwined in this work and we need to pay attention to all of them. The other thing that I want to say that I've observed about the early adopter colleges is really about the individuals working on this. This is systems change work, but it's individuals engaging in that work. So, you know, one of my first days on the job at College Spark, I got a copy of our logic model. So like all logic models, it had a list of the assets and resources we have, the challenges and context, and then activities, short-term outcomes, and long-term outcomes. And one of the things I read under challenges was not everyone shares our goal. And I remember looking at that and thinking, well, who are these people who do not share our goal? Who does not want more low-income students to get to college? And who's not interested in closing equity gaps? Who are these people? And really, I have to say, in 13 years at the foundation, I have met a handful of people who do not share our goal. But far more often than that, and more importantly, I encounter people every day who don't grasp their own power to advance that goal, or they don't see their place in advancing that goal. But I have to say that among the early adopter colleges, I can think of dozens of people who have learned to use their power and their privilege and their influence to move this agenda forward, especially around equity. So as you all start engaging in this work, I think you're going to get frustrated. If you're not getting frustrated, sometime soon you are not doing this work. You're doing something else. But as you get frustrated, I think that it's important that we all ask ourselves, how is my thinking that I don't have the power to change this particular situation perpetuating that situation? By doing what we've always done, we are upholding a system that is deeply inequitable. And I think that the truth about Guided Pathways is that it is a lot of big and hard change, and it causes tension and it causes stress. And I think we all know in all of our lives, even really positive changes, new babies, new houses, new jobs, those are stressful. But for some people on our campuses, these changes don't feel positive at all. They feel threatening. What if you liked the way things were? Who are you right now if that's where you're coming from? I mean, I think that there's a reason that it's called the comfort zone. And I think all 12 of the early adopters would probably tell you that in spite of all of their time and energy that they've put into this work, that pull to go back to doing things the way you've always done them is really strong. And it takes vigilance and vulnerability to stay in this place of growth and learning outside of the comfort zone. I really think that our capacity to stay in that area outside of our comfort zone is what's going to make the difference between Guided Pathways really being something that moves students forward and it being yet another initiative that falls by the wayside and doesn't make much difference. More than anything else, I think Guided Pathways is a timely and urgent invitation for us all to step out of our comfort zone and into the power that we all have to make meaningful change in our institutions. So thank you for engaging in this work and stepping up to bring this reform to your campuses. So I want Diane to share a few words.
So I'm going to bring us back. Diane Troyer, and I'm working with the coaches. And I'd like all of our coaches to stand here today, please. And the new coach, Mary Spildy, is joining our coaching ranks from Oregon. So, and potential coaches in training, all of you. Some of you aren't even standing. Okay, fine. There they go. Okay. So, I want to bring us back. Do we have the last? Yeah, bring us back just a couple things as we reflect on today and going forward in this work. And there are a few things that we've learned from the early adopters and from the AACC experience and others. And I just want to bring us back to Bob's start, where he said there were two things. It's not only the what, but the how. And I'm going to add two more questions or two more parts to that. The first one is how well. Because I think one of the challenges in being well-funded in this effort in Washington is, how do we not treat this as checking the box? And it is one thing that we can see in some colleges, that you can complete some of these steps, the transactional steps, and say, done, mapping. But are those maps really driving student schedules and student lives, and are you really tracking it? You know, you can say, oh, we've designed this a way to get students on the path, but have you actually changed what students are told when they're being advised? So, I mean, we really want to look at whether or not we have changed the way this is operating within the college. And part of that is, it's a big challenge. How can you have a grant and not treat it like a grant? Because I think this is not a project. This is not something that's going to go away when the funding ends. This is a change in the student experience and is going to be our new work in the community college field. So just want to put that in your thinking as we begin this. And then the last thing is really looking at, well, why? Why are you doing it? And I might ask that. Why are you doing it? Anybody? Why are you doing Pathways? What we're doing now isn't working for students. What else?
Research shows that it works.
Research, so this is not just an idea. We know that it works. Anything else?
Eliminate structural inequities.
So we are talking about, is equity actually driving the work, right? So, we got this. One, is there urgency behind? Do you really, is this something that you think has to change? Is this something that you're not satisfied with? Because if that isn't why you're doing this, it's not going to work. And then specifically, and I hope that you'll have these conversations in your college, what about pathways will change any of this? So it's one thing to say, I want to do pathways to improve student success. But if you don't understand what specifically you're going to be changing in the student experience and what outcome you expect, you may not get that outcome. So being really clear on whether or not, is equity driving this work? And if it is, then at the end of your journey, you're going to have different equity outcomes. But if it isn't driving it, it's not going to be your North Star. And then really, are you willing, as Heather talked about, are you really willing to have the courage to change the student experience? So asking yourself not only how well are we doing it with the kind of depth and courage that it takes, and always thinking again about why. Why are we really on this journey? It's hard and long, and having that clear vision of why you're in the work is really going to matter. So, Bob, any closing remarks? Yep, come on.
To Chin, I remember. It's interesting because I think all four of us use the word hard, that this is hard work. And so I think going into it knowing that this is hard, challenging work, and we've tried to suggest some lessons learned and some things to keep in mind, but I think it's also important to keep in mind that this is really hard, challenging work. And so if you're finding it really hard and challenging, that means you're doing the work. So.
I didn't mean to take the microphone. I'm Michelle Andreas. I'm, excuse me, recovering from a cold. And I'm the Vice President of Instruction at South Puget Sound Community College. I'm also honored to be one of the coaches. What I would also say is everything that they've said is true. It is absolutely true. And this is doable. We can do this. Like we can do this because we care. Because it matters and we have each other. So nobody's alone in this journey as we move through this. And we will you will see that we have in place a number of structures. But the greatest gift of the Washington Community and Technical College system is our ability to harness the collective talents that exist at all of our colleges, which is all of you. And you're brilliant. You come to this with incredible interest and effort and willingness to try and keep trying and working. So I just want to say, as we've said, it's hard. It's and it takes courage, and it's incredibly doable. And when you begin to start seeing some of the changes in the data for students, it is a happy dance moment. So thank you.
Wow, couldn't have paid her to say that, right? So what I'd like to do is take just a moment to build on what Michelle said off the cuff and say there are opportunities to celebrate in this work like there have not been opportunities in my experience in 20 years in our system, because you all are rock stars and you're doing really good work. This is the evolution of our work. So this is not about, gosh, it's been such a drag, it's been so bad. Yeah, some of it hasn't worked real well. And this is a chance to say, both by our legislator, and I'll be really honest about the pressure that I think folks are feeling around that. It is a big deal, and it's doable. And we have to do it. Like, what's our alternative? To say it's okay that we have equity gaps? To say that it's okay that our communities are not being served? And if you're the people paying the B&O tax, it's okay that I don't have the workforce I need? So this is our opportunity, right? It's exciting and it's wonderful and it's hard and daunting. And I love what Michelle said about, and we're in this together. That's the beautiful part about our system that is absolutely hands down the most unique in the nation in that space. We are more collective than any other that I've ever been a part of, and I've had witnessing to a lot of them. So